should be on 1565. First page, talks about clutches. Gonna watch a couple of videos, maybe help us get started in this, maybe understand it a little better. I have not watched this, but it looks like it might be helpful, so we'll see. Oops.
The components inside the system will
Hang on.
power flow.
Trying to sign it. I need to get the volume up here.
To be disconnected from the transmission input shaft. Note that the transmission input shaft does not itself connect to the engine crankshaft or flywheel. Connection to engine power is accomplished with a sliding friction disc, sometimes called a clutch plate, sandwiched between the flywheel surface and a movable pressure disc. The clutch plate assembly is splined to the transmission input shaft, but can slide back and forth. The pressure disc gradually squeezes everything together as the driver releases the clutch pedal for a smooth connection to engine power. To further ensure smooth power delivery, the clutch plate has a built-in damping system. The friction plate floats on the transmission input shaft. Power flows from the disc through damping springs which push against a rotating top plate whose center is splined to the transmission input shaft. The springs continuously absorb vibrations or other potentially harmful anomalies in the flow of power. Now let's look at how the pressure plate moves. The pressure plate is connected to a special diaphragm spring. This strong spring is what naturally presses the pressure plate to the flywheel. The outer cover has hooks that hold the diaphragm spring securely in place and act as a fulcrum. There are also supporting leaf springs attached to the pressure plate and cover. The clutch fork sits at the center of the diaphragm spring. As the clutch fork pivots, it presses against a release or throw-out bearing, depressing the diaphragm spring's inner prongs, which in turn lifts its outer edge and the connected pressure plate. Let's see that movement a few more times. The clutch fork acts as a lever with a fulcrum point on the transmission case interior surface. It's driven by a hydraulic actuator whose lines lead back to the clutch pedal with its own hydraulic actuator and fluid reservoir. The gears. Each speed has a gear set so that input speed can be different from output speed. The speed gears in this constant mesh transmission are always linked. They have diagonal or helical cut teeth for quieter operation. Notice the reverse gear set with its straight teeth. This transmission will make a familiar gear whining sound when in reverse. Engine power flows through the main shaft, to the counter shaft, to the differential assembly, and out through front axles. Synchronizing gears. To make gear shifting possible, one gear in each set floats freely on its shaft, riding on a roller bearing. The other gear in each set is either connected with splines or directly machined into its respective shaft. For power output, the floating gear in each set must become securely connected to the shaft through the synchronization process. Between each gear set, there's a synchronizer hub that's splined to and rotates with the shaft. A A sliding shift sleeve is also driven by this hub, which can be moved back and forth by a selector fork. Forks are connected to sliding rods that are held by the external casing. During gear selection, the fork moves the sleeve towards the desired gear. A blocker ring sits between the sleeve and the gear. The blocker ring's job is to get everything spinning at the same speed and lined up for a synchronization attempt, or block further movement if synchronization isn't possible for whatever reason. The hub has slots for 3 synchronizer keys that spin the blocker ring, but allow enough play so the blocker ring can adjust on the fly as the sleeve teeth approach. The shift sleeve's internal teeth are shaped to push against the keys, which in turn press the blocker ring against the gear. The ring's inside surface is conical and has ridges to engage the cone-shaped gear surface like a miniature clutch. Gradually, the gear begins to spin with the blocker ring. The keys are spring-loaded. Once enough pressing force builds, the keys are no longer needed and move down and out of the way, allowing the sleeve to progress into its final synchronized position with gear locking teeth. This process enables fast gear selection between rotating components while keeping main gear teeth safe from the change procedure. Locking teeth on the sleeve and gear are slightly angled in some designs, encouraging a more secure connection. Now, power flows through the splined hub and sleeve, through the gear set, and out of the transmission. To switch gears, the clutch is pressed in, pressure is relieved, and the sleeve can slide into synchronization with an adjacent floating gear. Since each sleeve can only slide between adjacent gears, for this 6-speed transmission, there are 3 selector forks and rods. The first and second floating gears operate from the output shaft, but this doesn't fundamentally change functionality in any way. Forks and rods only move back and forth, as directed by the shift change assembly. This component can swing side to side to select a specific rod and fork. And once selected, a metal tab pushes the fork one way or the other. Let's trace this component's movement from the shift lever itself. The shift lever rides on a ball that allows movement on 2 axes. Each movement axis is separated into its own cable. These work something like bicycle brake cables to translate stick movement to the transmission. At the other end, cables are attached to a rod that protrudes out of the transmission case. This rod can move up and down or rotate based on distinct cable input. A specially designed piece at the other end of this rod moves connected components to swing side to side or slide the metal tab back and forth. Reverse gear. The reverse gear has its own rod and selector fork. The transmission must come to a complete stop to shift into reverse as there are no synchronization components. Adding the third idler gear to the system reverses final output. Neutral. When in the neutral position with no gears selected and the clutch engaged, meaning the clutch pedal is not pressed in, the transmission input shaft spins, but since no gear is synchronized, no power flows out of the transmission. Oil. Oil rests at the bottom of the case and is splashed up onto gears for lubrication. There's no oil pump or filter.
So when it says, so the term, you burned out the clutch or the clutch is burned, at what point within there is it burned? What section, what part is burned, becomes burned?
Okay.
The friction plate.
Which in turn messes up the flywheel and this surface here. Okay? If that happens, obviously you would have to replace the clutch disc, pressure plate, which comes as a clutch kit. The flywheel, this can be resurfaced just like turning a brake rotor. You get a new surface on it. You put it on a special cutter, it cuts the bad spots out of it and makes a nice fresh surface for it. This can be cut just like a brake rotor can. Okay? It'd be the same thing if you overheated your brakes. The brake pads and the rotors are gonna get messed up. You can think of this as the brake pad rotor kind of thing. Okay? Okay.
So you burn your clutch by just holding it down when you're not.
By not knowing how to drive. Normally that happens if somebody is typically just learning how or doesn't know how to drive a manual transmission. What they do is they release the clutch pedal too slow. And it just gets really hot because it slips for a long time before the clutch pedal's actually up. Once the clutch pedal's up, it's fully synchronized between the pressure plate and the flywheel. Okay?
How about giving it gas and your foot's still like off the clutch? That too.
No, that doesn't hurt anything. If you have it in too high of a gear and you're trying to accelerate, that could be a problem because you have the gear reduction that you need, you're in the wrong gear. Like if you're trying to accelerate from a stop in, second or third gear, not gonna work out too well. Okay, you guys awake back there? Everything okay? No headache today, hopefully? Awesome.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
In this big tracks, sometimes you need to apply gas to change the gears. You don't need to press the clutch. So
Okay.
How does that work?
If you're driving a manual transmission, you let off of the gas pedal and you push in on the clutch to shift it.
Yeah, but with this big track, sometimes you don't need to press the clutch pedal. You just need to give it a little gas, then you change it.
Yeah, that can be done on some of them, yeah, but it's not common, but yeah, it's possible, yeah. All right, let's go through, see what we got here on the clutch scepter. Hopefully, it's a little bit clearer after watching that. I know that was a little bit of transmission too, but I thought that might have just been a clutch video, but I didn't watch it first, so. As we go through this, we're gonna go through the function operation of the clutch, how to diagnose problems with the clutch, how to replace it, how to adjust the clutch, explain how to bleed a hydraulic system. So in this video, just so you know, not every one of these is cable operated from the shifter to the transmission. If it's front wheel drive, it probably has something like that. If it's a rear wheel drive, typically the shifter is connected right to those shift shafts, like a top loader type of transmission. Okay? Purpose and function of the clutch. Disconnect the engine from the transmission transaxle, permit the engine to remain running while the vehicle is stopped. We talked about before, if anybody's ever driven a manual transmission, if you come to a stop and don't push the clutch in, the engine's gonna die. Or if you don't put it in neutral, right? Because you have a direct connection there. Connect and transmit engine torque to the transmission transaxle, dampen, absorb engine impulses and drivetrain vibration. You saw the springs in the clutch disc, that's what that's for. Provide smooth engagement and disengagement between the engine and the transmission or transaxle. Clutch pedal linkage. 3 methods of transferring the force from your foot on the clutch pedal to the release bearing. Just so you know, this is called a throwout bearing or release bearing, okay? Same thing, just a couple of different names for it. I don't, yes I do, I have one right here. This is what this is, and this goes right here. Clutch fork goes on that, that's what pushes on here. This would be the release bearing, throwout bearing. Could use levers and rods, could be cable operated, or it can be hydraulic. Your friction disc, that's just your clutch disc that allows the power transfer from the flywheel to the pressure plate. Some high-performance clutch discs do not use a cushion for the engagement, but don't worry about that. Stock clutch disc. Around the center of the hub are the discs and the torsional dampeners that absorb the initial shock of engagement like we saw in the video. I think we can see that on this one as well. That's these springs here. Okay, you saw in the video when you engage the clutch, these kind of keep it from just being a hard engagement, you know what I mean?
That jerk.
Right. Okay? Okay. Okay, we just did that. How do we get back to there? Okay. Pressure plate is also called a clutch cover sometimes, okay? That's the big piece there that bolts to the flywheel. The purpose of the pressure plate to exert force on the clutch disc so the engine torque can be transmitted from the engine to the transaxle. Several types of pressure plates are used. Spring, coil spring type, diaphragm type. Not really too much to worry about there. Your flywheel. Engine flywheel serves the basic purpose, smooths out and dampens engine power pulses, absorbs the heat created by the clutch operation, provides connection point to the starter motor to crank the engine, same way it does on an automatic transmission. Right? Provides application surface for the clutch disc. We saw that on the flywheel sitting there on the table, if you want to take a better look at that. They do make things called dual mass flywheels. They just help dampen engine vibrations, keep them from being transmitted to the passenger compartment so you don't feel that. Okay? Your pilot bearing or pilot bushing, that goes in the back of the crankshaft. Some engines it will be actually in the flywheel, like you see on this one. Right in the center here, see this? You can put your finger in there and spin it. That's actually a bearing.
Oh.
Okay? This is where the input shaft of the transmission goes. Okay? So there's actually a bearing in here. Normally, it's in the back of the crankshaft. This one happens to be in the flywheel. Sometimes it's a bushing instead of a bearing, but for the most of them, they do use a bearing. Okay? Your release bearing is what you just saw. Installation of that, it just is going to have a snap ring or some sort of spring clips that hold it to the clutch fork. Those sleeves will slide on the outer surface of the front bearing retainer, which is commonly called the quill shaft, or the candlestick. This is going to ride on the that part of the transmission. So when you push the clutch in, it can slide back and forth. Push on that. And again, just release the pressure, okay? Obviously this rotates with that until you push the clutch in, or until it's released. Okay. Bearing lubrication, normally you don't have to do any bearing lubrication on that. They're sealed when they're made. There's a little diagram of the parts. As you can see, crankshaft, flywheel, clutch disc, your pressure plate, the release bearing, clutch fork, input shaft, transmission. So if you were to pull a manual transmission out of a car, the clutch and everything stays with the engine. Remember on the automatic, you pull the automatic transmission out, the torque converter stays with the transmission. The clutch and everything stays on the engine when you pull it out, okay? Okay, when the clutch is released, the clutch pedal depressed, okay? Clutch fork is applied a force to the throwout bearing, which pushes on the diaphragm spring, releasing the pressure from the friction disc. We saw a little bit of that in the video as well. Same thing there. Okay, so here's your clutch disc. It's splined to the input shaft of the transmission, right? You can see when you let the clutch out, the power is transmitted through the transmission, right? Because the clutch disc is now pressed between the pressure plate and the flywheel, right? When you saw a minute ago when they pushed the clutch pedal in, it released it, so now you got no power transfer, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, we'll watch that again real quick. Okay, that's what happens when you push the clutch in, all right?
So, release is when the paddle is down.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Engage is when the pedal is up, when you're not pushing on it. That means it's engaged. That means you have power transfer from the engine to the output shaft. Transmission just been removed. Notice this type incorporates a bell housing. Most of them do now. Older manual transmission systems, the bell housing used to be a separate piece, the part where it bolts to the engine. A lot of them now, they just incorporated it into the transmission. The throwout bearing and the clutch fork will come out with it. If it has a cable, it will work like that. Again, some are hydraulic, some are lever operated, and some are cable operated. Hydraulic, it's going to have a master cylinder and a slave cylinder, just like your brakes do, okay? This is your master cylinder for your clutch. This is the slave cylinder that operates the clutch fork. And your line, this works just like a brake system, okay? You could think of this as your master cylinder for your brakes. The slave cylinder would be your brake calipers or wheel cylinders, so it's a drum brake. It also uses brake fluid in that system. Okay, this is a typical clutch master cylinder mounted to the bulkhead on the driver's side of the vehicle. Brake fluid is used in that system. Normally the same brake fluid that the brakes use. It's just a smaller master cylinder, should be very close to the actual master cylinder for the brakes. Different type of clutch disc. That's kind of like the one we have on the table there that we saw in the video as well. Those are your torsional damper springs. They have a wave spring between the two friction surfaces, also helps to cushion the engagement. This is a pie-shaped cutout of a clutch disc. If you took a clutch disc and kind of cut a piece out of it, just showing you how it's constructed there. actually pressure plated as well. Different type. This is the diaphragm style, that's the lever style. Does the same thing, it's just a different style of spring. Okay, remember I told you the flywheel could be resurfaced if you do a clutch replacement? Okay. This is obviously a different type of flywheel because it has a lot more surface area for the clutch, but they just put it on a grinder, kind of like your brake lathe, and resurface that. Okay, we talked a little bit about run out. So we know run out is what? What does that mean if you're checking the run out on something?
You're checking the length of it, how much space it has.
Okay, if you look at the picture here, we have the flywheel, right? Bolted crankshaft. Got a dial indicator here. Dial indicator has to be mounted securely to something, and then the indicator put on whatever you're checking. So let's say you had this dial indicator mounted to the a bell housing here or something, right? Or the engine. You put the dial indicator on here, zero this, and then just turn it. And this is going to move a little bit here and there depending on how flat this turns. That's all it is. Just to make sure it's not doing this as it rotates. Because it has to turn pretty much perfectly true. That's just a run out measurement. Okay, that's what they call that. Starter motor will spin, but the engine will not crank if the ring gear is broken. Some older flywheels, you can actually replace the ring gear on the outside of it. It was pressed onto the flywheel. Don't see that really anymore. Just showing you dual mass flywheel. There are oil leaks before replacing the clutch. Clutch gets oil on it, that's a problem. They're just telling you make sure you fix oil leaks if you got a problem with that. Showing the input shaft seal and transmission. Okay. This transaxle assembly has been removed to replace the clutch. Notice the short input shaft. This vehicle does not use a pilot bearing or pilot bushing. Okay? Doesn't need it. Normally, a front wheel drive manual transmission will not have a pilot bearing or pilot bushing, just for rear wheel drive, okay? Another picture of your release bearing and clutch fork. Showing you the area where the throttle bearing rides on the pressure plate there. Another picture of another style. Most clutches and vehicles now are hydraulically operated. You don't see a whole lot of clutch or manual linkage type or something like that. This is one of them that uses the hydraulic throw-out bearing. It actually sits right inside there on the shaft there, and you have two lines here. One is for your brake or your clutch fluid feed. The other's a bleeder. You know, your brake calipers have bleeders on them. Same thing with that. You got to get the air out of it. Can't have air in a hydraulic system, okay? 3 methods of transferring the force from your foot to the release bearing. What are they?
Lever.
Okay, lever is one of them. Hydraulic is another one.
Coil, spring.
And cable, right?
Cable.
Yeah. Okay. As we get into this, and I'm sure they'll show up on the ASE tests, they're going to ask you certain questions about how to diagnose clutch problems and what you're going to experience depending on what's going on with it, okay? Common method used to check for a slipping clutch. Drive the vehicle to a safe location where it can be accelerated safely. always they're gonna tell you safety first, right? Accelerate the vehicle in first or second gear, rapidly shift into a higher gear. Engine speed should drop as the clutch is released after selecting the higher gear. If the clutch is slipping, the engine speed will either rise or not drop after the clutch pedal is released.
Check for slipping clutch.
Okay? Okay. Symptom chart somewhere in here.
1577.
Is that one in the book as well? Should be, right? Yeah, I see it. Yeah. 1577. Okay. Clutch slips, possible causes. Clutch is worn or out of adjustment. Clutch disc has oil on the surface. Flywheel height is out of specifications. First two make sense, right? What does flywheel height out of specifications mean?
Flywheel height is out of specifications.
Mm-hmm.
It's wrong size, or it was.
That is when,
What's that?
that's when some of the surfaces are being removed.
It was too resurfaced.
Yep. Okay, here's your flywheel. This is the surface where the clutch disc rides on, right? So if you go to replace the clutch, you should have this resurfaced, right? You're taking material off of it. So this becomes a little bit thinner, right? Okay, so if you do this too many times, this flywheel is not going to have the same, it's not going to have the same pressure on it because you took too much material off of there. In which point the flywheel would have to be replaced.
Okay.
So that's what we're talking about, flywheel height out of specification.
So
Probably
what's-
been cut too many times. It's like a brake rotor. Ever notice brake rotor's gonna have a minimum thickness on it? They're printed on the brake rotor. You can only cut so much off of it before it's no good.
is-
Some people put shim in between flywheel, the flywheel. Here it says here.
No orange box.
Let's see. Not familiar with what you're talking about.
1571.
1571, let's see.
Type tip.
1571.
The orange box at the top.
Shim it or replacing, whenever replacing a clutch, experts agree the flywheel should be removed from the engine and resurfaced, yep. The material is removed from the surface of the flywheel. Yes, 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 we know that. So they're talking about putting a shim behind the, between the crankshaft and the flywheel to make up for the part that was cut. I suppose you could do that. You'd have the same result if you did that, but I suppose if you wanted to take the easy way out, it's certainly a lot cheaper than a
Replacement.
replacing a flywheel. However, you might have trouble finding shims for them. I don't know that that's really a common thing. So what that would be is just a really thin piece of metal that would go in between the flywheel and the actual crankshaft to bring the flywheel closer to the clutch disc to make up the material that was taken off of it. Common cause of the clutch slipping. What are some common causes of a clutch slipping?
Wear.
It's worn out, right?
Yeah.
Okay? What else?
Disc has oil on the surface.
We have oil on it, maybe the engine was leaking oil in the back and getting on the clutch somehow. Okay, what else?
The flywheel height is out of specifications.
Yep, or the flywheel, yep. Okay, could be out of adjustment cause it slip as well, okay? So, if you're driving down the road in your car with manual transmission, how would you know if the clutch was slipping? What would be an indication as you were driving that the clutch was slipping? How would you know? Or would you know?
When you apply the clutch and the speed is not dropping.
When you go to accelerate
Yeah.
and the engine speed comes up, but the car doesn't really go any faster, right?
Yeah.
You're also gonna probably smell it, because you're gonna smell that disc getting really hot or slipping, right? Kinda like, if you overheat your brakes, you kinda get that, you know, smell off of the friction material. All right, I think the last few pages, this goes through clutch replacement. And this is gonna be basic for every car. Obviously, you're gonna have to lift the car, disconnect everything that's connected to the transmission, whether it's electrical connector, a slave cylinder, speedometer, whatever it is. You're just gonna unhook everything off of it, unbolt it, pull the transmission out. Once it's out, you can remove the clutch plate, pressure plate, and all that kind of stuff. If the flywheel does not need to be resurfaced, you can just clean it and just put it back together with new clutch disc, throw-up bearing, and pressure plate. Replace or lubricate the pilot bearing or bushing, install new clutch and related components, reinstall the transmission. Release bearing is going to go with the transmission. Because it rides on that part. Okay, so this guy, what's he doing?
Resurfacing or just cleaning it?
He's taking the easy way out. He doesn't want to take the flywheel off, have it resurfaced, so he's putting a little disc on a grinder and just kind of cleaning it up a little bit. I would be careful if you do that, because it would be easy to get uneven spots in it where you took too much here, not enough there, or whatever. Could cause problems. If you do it lightly, you'd probably be okay, but I wouldn't get too crazy with that if you're gonna do it.
Is it sparking? I see it.
What's that?
It's sparking, huh? Shooting off sparks?
I don't know, is it?
Yeah, right there, above it, above that little disc.
Oh, I can't see it from this angle.
He's talking about right here,
It's shooting out sparks.
right there.
Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it? I see it now.
Should it be doing that?
Well, again, I would be careful if you're gonna do that. All right. Typical clutch kit. What are you gonna get in it? If you go buy a clutch kit for your car, you're going to get more than likely 4 pieces. Clutch disc, pressure plate, throw-up bearing, and an alignment tool, which is this guy right here. Little plastic thing that just mimics the input shaft of the transmission. So when you put this together, this clutch disc has to be aligned perfectly centered with the input shaft of the transmission. This one here, the way this works, this almost does it for you, but still, see how there's a little bit of movement here? So if you don't have that lined up perfectly, the transmission's not gonna go in. Okay? So you're gonna get an alignment tool. So when you install it, you're gonna put the clutch disc up against the flywheel and make sure you don't put it in backwards, because sometimes they'll go both ways. You're gonna put the alignment tool in there. That's gonna center the clutch disc with the back of the crankshaft and the pilot bearing. Then you can put the pressure plate on there, bolt it up, and then pull that out. Check that the clutch is properly installed before replacing all the components. Try turning the output shaft of the transmission gear and the clutch pedal depressed with somebody else helping you. Okay. Most hydraulic linkage is self-adjusting, does not require any adjustment in normal service. So if you have a hydraulic clutch, which if you have a newer car, it's gonna be a hydraulic clutch. No real adjustment exists on those, okay? It's just kinda like, do you ever have to adjust your brakes? If you have a car with disc brakes, you never have to adjust the brakes, okay? It's not necessary. Same with the clutch. If it's a lever type, it must be adjusted for pedal free play. Some cable operated clutches are either self-adjusting or adjusted easily. So just remember, if it's hydraulic, there's no adjustment. The other types of linkages may require an adjustment. Clutch slip during acceleration can occur if there is a lack of free play in the pedal. If the clutch is adjusted properly, you should be able to push down on the clutch pedal a little bit. There should be maybe an inch or so of travel before you feel resistance on it, okay? If it's hard all the way at the top to where you push on the clutch pedal, there's no free play there, it's probably out of adjustment. If there's too much free play, it's going to be difficult to shift into gear. And it probably will slip. Fluid leaks or failure to release completely indicates the need for hydraulic system service. Hydraulic clutch bleeding. In most cases, the system can be bled by gravity bleeding. In others, helper may be needed. Gravity bleeding just means opening the bleeder, taking the top off the cap off the master cylinder, and just letting it drip. It'll push the air out. You can do that with brakes as well. If you don't have somebody to help you bleed brakes, you can just open the bleeders and let it gravity bleed itself. Eventually it will push the air out. It just takes longer. Gravity bleeding hydraulic clutch, open the bleeder, allows the air to escape, and then fluid should flow out of there. Notice the bleeder's on the top, always, even with your brake calipers. Bleeder's always gonna be on the top, okay? I saw an instance one time where a guy brought his Chevy truck into the dealer I was working at. He had a problem with the brakes. He thought he'd do his own brake job at home. Made a pretty big mistake, put the brake calipers on the wrong sides, on the front. So the bleeders were actually on the bottom. And there was no way to get the air out of them. So it just didn't work right. So he brought it in, said, I replaced all this stuff myself and the brakes don't work right. Well, of course they don't, but the calipers on the wrong side. And the bleeders are actually on the bottom. So let's say this was the brake caliper, the bleeder was down here. You're never gonna get the air out of it if that's not the highest point. Okay, again, just basic, whatever it takes to get the transmission out. Without in this particular picture, unbolting the pressure plate. Move the pilot bearing if you're gonna replace it. Pilot needs to be resurfaced. You're gonna pull it off, have it redone. That's what it looks like on the tree surface, good, ready to go. New pilot bearing, your clutch alignment tool to line the clutch disc up. And that's all there is to it. Shouldn't have done that, right? Okay, what other? Not that. Not that. I think I closed this whole thing down, didn't I? Yeah, I did. No, I'm still good. Okay. Okay. one for you. There's your reward for putting up with David.
How would I be able to obtain forklift certification through him? Do I have to speak with him separately about that? Cause I went to my counselor and she said I'd have to wait a year.
Forklift? Yeah, we were actually talking about that the other day. They're thinking about adding forklift to this class and making it just part of it, but right now it isn't. But if you wanted to do forklift training, I could talk to Renee and see what you'd have to do.
Okay, I'd appreciate it, thank you.
Sure.
Nazir. No, KJ. What's your job? You know? Yeah. Like Aaron and KJ. I said, when you work, no, no, I was asking Kevin. She has 2 kids.
What did she do?
She's like a porter, bro. She got short hair. Look like a bully. She be like, you know what a quick loop is? She like, not in a quick loop, but she be like, quick loop in it. She like, what it is.
You good?
Yeah.
You know, Crystal?
Crystal?
Crystal is, equipment manager.
Crystal? You mean like, what's up with that?
Is she short?
Yeah, she's
She
short.
like blonde?
She like, a head reporter, like, head reporter.
Who's your manager?
Bro, it's like, bro, we went there, like, the girl, right? Bro.
Is she wear like a sweet hat? Like,
It might be different, because you do night shift on.
When you working?
is that the right people or you have to go there?
The Subaru right across the street.
Yeah, so we're, you know.
Bro. She like every
It's Crystal.
her name's Chris.
Downtown.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's
How do you
yeah, she's the manager. I think she's, they just let her become manager.
Yeah, she knew it.
She's named, she got promoted. She's been there a year. You don't know KJ? KJ, she got short hair. She looked like a bull. Yeah.
Oh, the white girl, a white girl, like,
Yeah.
you know, with the short hair, she got like a tattoo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you manager her quickly?
No, not her. He was bringing her because she got 2 kids.
Yeah, she was new, yeah, she was new.
So, are you working with Thomas? Oh, Thomas. Oh, okay. Hey, Thomas, Thomas said you was taking all the filters off with your hand. Yeah. I hope you got some strength.
Okay, so the word is,
Yeah.
if you want to pay for it out of your pocket, you can take it anytime you want. If you go to get funding for another class at this school, it's a year wait. Okay?
How much is it out of pocket?
$750.
Oh, shit.
That's what I said. Said she's not gonna do that.
Yeah, no.
So, if you wanna do it, you gotta wait a year.
Yeah.
You can't get funding through the school for more than one class unless you wait a year, okay? So if you wanted to, I don't know, whatever, take CDL class, truck driving, you'd have to wait a year, because you already got funding for this class.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yep. How's everybody doing on that thing? Is it all done? Yeah? Okay. Let's run through it like we normally do.
Okay. What is the purpose and function of a clutch? To disconnect the engine from the transmission transaxle, to connect and transmit engine torque to the transmission transaxle, to dampen and absorb engine impulses and drivetrain vibration.
All of them.
It's all of it.
All of those are good, right? It does all of those things. All right.
Most motor friction discs have cushion springs to be moved thus away from the clutch engagement surfaces.
Helps smooth the engagement of the clutch. C, right? Yeah.
Number 3, technician A says that With self-adjusting clutch systems, the release bearing consistently rotates. Technician B says the ball bearing portion of the release bearing should be lubricated with high temperature grease during routine maintenance. Which technician is correct? A.
Yes. Okay, 3 is A. 4, what happens when the clutch pedal is depressed?
Charles?
For what happens when the clutch pedal is depressed? It's C, A, and B.
Mm-hmm. These bearings pushed against the levers to release it. Pressure plate springs are being compressed. Both of those happen when you push the clutch in.
So technician A says the flywheel is actually moving camshaft and rotate moving speed. Technician B says the pressure plate also rotates at the end. That's it.
You said what? B?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Flywheel's attached to the engine, rotates at engine speed, doesn't have any choice, right? It's bolted right to the crankshaft.
Yeah.
Pressure plate, bolted to the flywheel,
Yeah.
has no choice but to rotate with the engine, okay? Both of them,
Both?
yep. The pressure plate is never released from the engine. The clutch disc is when you push it in. Okay, C for 5.
C for 5.
C for 5.
Oh, I got 6.
You got what?
6?
Yeah, you're on 6.
I was, anyways. Where is the hydraulic clutch master cylinder located? I put C.
I'm sorry?
C.
Where is the,
Where is the clutch master cylinder located?
I put C.
C?
Yeah.
It's A.
Mm-hmm.
Pressure plate assembly may include all the following except B.
Okay, pressure plate assembly will include everything except for D is right. And why is that?
Comes with 4 or 5 things.
Because there's no clutch fork as part of the pressure plate, okay? D for 7. Number 8.
Number 8 is, a clutch is chattering when engaged. Technician A says that too much clutch free play is the cause. Technician B says that oil or grease may be on the friction disc. Which technician is correct?
Both?
Is it both?
Negative.
Is B.
B, yeah. Too much free play has nothing to do with chattering. Chattering means when you let the clutch out, it kind of grabs and releases real quick. Just, okay?
Okay. So, free play has nothing to do with
All right.
chattering.
Free play means it's out of adjustment. Means it's not going to go into gear very good. It's not going to shift very good because the clutch disc isn't releasing completely. Okay, where are we at? 9?
Technician A says a short input shaft needs a pilot bearing for support. Technician B says pilot bushings are usually pressed into the center of the crankshaft flange. Which technician is correct? Is it both?
B? B is the right answer. Pilot bushings are pressed into the center of the crankshaft. This guy says a short input shaft needs a pilot bearing, which we talked about, it does not. Front wheel drive transmissions with a short input shaft, they don't need that pilot bearing to support the input shaft. It doesn't have the length that would require. All right.
Which part does not rotate when the engine is running and the clutch is depressed?
Is it C?
No, pressure plate goes with the engine.
No, it's not C. Which part does not rotate? You got the engine running, right? You're sitting in the car, engine's running. okay? You push the clutch pedal in. One component does not rotate once you push that clutch in. The clutch disc, yes.
I thought that.
That's what stops rotating. The whole assembly rotates together until you push the clutch in. As soon as you put the clutch in, that clutch disc stops. That way you can put it in gear, let the clutch out, and then it will engage because it's flying to the input shaft of the transmission. All right. Let's see. Okay. Let's run through these questions with whoever we left off on.
Charles.
Charles, what part is often not used in a front-wheel drive vehicle with manual trans axle?
Flywheel.
D,
What's that?
is it D?
D? It is D. Right, short input shaft, front wheel drive, typically doesn't use a pilot bearing. It has to have the rest of these or it won't work. Okay, we did this. This does not rotate when the clutch is depressed. Yeah, hydraulic clutch to slave cylinder, what?
Is it C?
Is it what?
C.
C?
B. Well, both
Most
maybe.
people would say C, that's a common answer, but this is the right answer. It's not necessarily connected to the clutch pedal. It is and it isn't, not directly connected to it, okay? Which is a little bit misleading, so C is not a bad answer, it's just not exactly right, the way it's worded. Okay? Leading the clutch. Who gets number 4?
Two technicians discussing bleeding hydraulic clutch. Position A says to open the bleeder and allow fluid to gravity bleed. Position B says to have assistance slowly depress the clutch pedal as the bleeder valve is opening at the slave.
That's the slave cylinder.
To bleed out
Bleed out the air,
of the
this is-
system. Both.
Okay, both of them is good.
What should be done if you see the clutch slipping? B?
B is correct. Rapidly accelerate in first or second gear, rapidly shift into higher gear. That was on the thing we did earlier as well. Okay, number 6.
Technician A says all cable-operated clutch linkages require manual adjustment as part of routine service. Technician B says some cable-operated clutch linkages have a self-adjusting mechanism. Which technician is correct?
A.
What do you think?
I know B is wrong.
A, right?
I think B is
D,
right.
D is correct.
Yeah,
Which
'cause
one?
They have
B.
this, B is
B?
right.
Charles has been our man lately, hasn't he? Okay, what's wrong with this? All and
All.
some.
And
Yeah.
some, yeah,
Not necessarily all of them,
yeah,
and some of them do.
yeah. B.
It's B, yeah. That's right. Number 7.
The pressure plate assembly may also be correct.
Release assembly?
Pressure plate assembly, this guy right here. What is it also called? Has another name.
C.
What is it?
C.
Is it a clutch cover?
Clutch cover. Okay?
What What is the purpose and function of a dual mass flywheel? C.
For the purpose of the function, okay. Dual mass flywheel, remember that one? Basically the same thing as the springs and the clutch disc. Okay? Okay, we did number 9. How about 10? When the clutch engages, what does that mean? Pedal up or down?
Up.
Up.
Up. No pressure on the pedal, right? It's engaged. You disengage it when you push the clutch in. When the clutch engages,
In the pressure plate?
spring force clamps the clutch friction disc between the flywheel and what?
Pressure plate.
Of course. All right. All right.
Can we do the tractor quiz, please?
What's that?
The tractor quiz on page 1581.
Mm-hmm. Okay, 1 you should know the answer to.
Yes.
2 we did. 3 we did. 4 we did. 5 we did. 6 we did not do.
I think it's C, I think.
Manual transmission, difficult to shift into gear, especially reverse. Technician A says the clutch may not be fully releasing. Technician B says too much free play in the pedal, and you're right, they're both correct. C for 6 in the book, 1581. Okay, before removing the transmission to replace the clutch, the what must be disconnected?
Battery, right?
All of them, yeah.
Oh, it's all of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, 8 looks like a new question. Too much clutch pedal free play can cause the clutch to slip during acceleration. Tech B says too little clutch free play can cause it to slip.
Both.
Whenever you see a question that gives you 2 different scenarios and they're opposites, it's almost never both of them. It can't be both ways. Too much free play or not enough free play would cause the clutch to slip.
Too much?
No,
No?
not enough.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I don't know.
Okay, 8 is B. What needs to be done before attaching the pressure plate to the flywheel?
A.
Hey, align the clutch disc to the pilot bearing. Yep, with that little tool, that alignment tool they give you with the clutch kit. And we did 10, that is both of them. Okay.
But what is this?
This is 25 questions all about what we just talked about.
Oh, joy.
Which we will do all together when you're done. And as normal, you will grade your own as we go through it. No book? No book? This is a test your knowledge thing, it's not graded, just want to see how you're doing, okay? So, it's not gonna be part of your grade, it's not gonna affect anything in the class, just to see how much you, absorbed from the last chapter.
Are we gonna get last Wednesday's test?
Did I not give everybody last Wednesday's test yet? Okay.
I don't even know what my grade is for this class yet.
Yeah, we're gonna do that too.
Looking for somebody with silver foil titanium.
I don't know, guys, I'm not sure what you guys drive.
Anybody driving a silver Ford titanium?
No.
No.
Nobody here? No? Oh, that's you, this is you. This is you.
This is a wow.